The frigid Pacific waters off the coast of Guadalcanal churned with an unnatural violence on the morning of November 23, 1942. 60 feet beneath the surface, Navy Petty Officer First Class Matthias Kovalenko gripped his diving helmet with trembling hands as the compression chamber sealed around him. Above, the USS Intrepid's crew scrambled across rain-slicked decks, their urgent voices barely audible through the steel hull that separated him from the chaos of war. The taste of recycled air mixed with machine oil filled his mouth as he prepared for a descent that would either save thousands of American lives or destroy his naval career in a single act of unprecedented disobedience. "Kovalenko, this is a direct order," came the crackling voice through his helmet's communication system. "Surface immediately. We're moving to new coordinates." Lieutenant Commander Harrison's tone carried the weight of absolute authority, but Matthias knew something his commanding officer didn't. 300 yards beneath the Intrepid, according to his calculations, lay the source of the mysterious torpedo attacks that had claimed 17 American vessels in the past month. No sonar had detected it, no reconnaissance flight had spotted its periscope, no destroyer escort had recorded any hostile contact in the vicinity. Yet Matthias had felt it through his improvised underwater detection equipment, a subtle vibration through the water that his experienced hands recognized as the distinctive pulse of a Japanese submarine's electric motors running in complete silence mode. The rhythmic pattern was almost imperceptible, designed to mimic the natural oscillations of ocean currents. But Matthias had spent 3 weeks learning to distinguish between mechanical signatures and ambient noise. His modified hydrophone, constructed from spare radio components and waterproof housing, could detect acoustic anomalies that the Navy's standard sonar equipment completely missed. "Acknowledged, sir," he replied into his microphone, knowing full well he had no intention of surfacing until he had completed a mission that no commanding officer would ever authorize. Beginning descent now. With deliberate movements that would either save hundreds of American lives or end his own in court-martial disgrace, Matthias Kovalenko released the safety line that connected him to naval authority and began his unauthorized journey into the Pacific's black heart. No one in the Pacific Fleet knew that one diver's defiance that morning would expose a Japanese underwater warfare technology so advanced it would revolutionize submarine detection for the remainder of the war. Matthias Kovalenko had never intended to become a hero of the Pacific theater, nor had he envisioned that his working-class origins would provide the foundation for innovations that would reshape naval warfare. Born in the steel mill town of Youngstown, Ohio, on a bitter February morning in 1917, he grew up in a household where the rhythm of industrial machinery provided the soundtrack to daily life, and the smell of coal smoke marked the changing of work shifts. His father, Pavel Kovalenko, had immigrated from Ukraine with nothing but calloused hands and an unshakable work ethic, finding employment in the blast furnaces that fed America's growing appetite for steel and military hardware. The Kovalenko family measured prosperity in simple terms: hot meals during Ohio's brutal winters, sturdy boots that lasted through multiple seasons of factory work, and the luxury of a hand-cranked phonograph that played scratchy recordings of popular songs on Sunday evenings when the mills fell silent. Matthias learned early that survival in industrial America required more than following instructions. It demanded the ability to improvise solutions when machinery failed, supervisors disappeared, and safety protocols proved inadequate for the realities of dangerous work. His fascination with underwater mechanics began during summer visits to Lake Erie, where his uncle Dmitri operated a small salvage business, recovering sunken boats, lost cargo, and the occasional drowning victim whose family could afford professional recovery services. Matthias spent countless hours watching commercial divers disappear beneath the murky surface of the Great Lake, their air hoses trailing behind them like mechanical lifelines connecting them to the surface world of light and breathable atmosphere. By age 15, demonstrating the mechanical ingenuity that would later save thousands of lives in the Pacific, Matthias had constructed his own diving helmet from a large metal bucket, rubber gaskets salvaged from automobile tires, and a bicycle pump operated by his younger brother Victor. The contraption nearly killed him on its first test when the improvised air supply system failed at a depth of 12 feet, But Matthias emerged from the lake with a piece of a sunken propeller blade and an unquenchable thirst for underwater exploration that would define the rest of his life. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Matthias was 24 years old and working as a certified welder in the Youngstown shipyards, where Liberty ships took shape under the urgent demands of wartime production schedules. The news of the attack reached him as he bent over a steel hull section, sparks cascading from his acetylene torch like miniature fireworks celebrating America's entry into global warfare. His foreman, a gruff Irish immigrant named Seamus O'Malley, gathered the workers around a battery-powered radio to hear President Roosevelt's declaration that December 7th would live in infamy. "Boys," O'Malley announced after the broadcast ended, his voice thick with emotion and determination, "looks like we'll be building a lot more ships for our Navy." But Matthias had already made his decision during Roosevelt's speech. He wanted to be on those ships, not just building them in the relative safety of Ohio shipyards. The attack on Pearl Harbor had personalized the conflict in ways that newspaper headlines could never accomplish, transforming a distant European war into an immediate threat to American security and freedom. The Navy recruiting station in downtown Youngstown buzzed with activity in the weeks following Pearl Harbor, as young men from across northeastern Ohio lined up to volunteer for military service that would take them thousands of miles from the industrial landscape they had known since birth. When Matthias presented himself for enlistment on a snowy morning in early January 1942, the recruitment officer, Chief Petty Officer Raymond Williams, reviewed his background documents with growing interest and enthusiasm. Underwater salvage experience, advanced mechanical aptitude demonstrated through welding certification, and a documented history of innovative problem-solving made him an ideal candidate for the Navy's specialized diving units, which were expanding rapidly to meet the demands of global maritime warfare. "Son," Williams said, stamping Matthias's enlistment papers with official approval, "the fleet needs men who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty underwater and think for themselves when the manual doesn't cover the situation." Basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station during the brutal winter of 1942 tested every assumption Matthias had formed about military life and the relationship between individual initiative and institutional authority. The rigid hierarchy, the endless repetition of drill procedures, the absolute requirement for unquestioning obedience to orders regardless of personal opinion, all of it conflicted with the independent thinking and creative problem-solving that had served him well throughout his civilian career. Advanced Diving School in Norfolk, Virginia, during the spring of 1942, introduced Matthias to the sophisticated underwater technologies and operational procedures that separated Navy divers from civilian salvage operators. The curriculum covered deep water diving techniques, underwater welding and cutting operations, submarine rescue procedures, and the maintenance of complex life support systems under extreme conditions. Matthias excelled in all aspects of the training program, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of water pressure dynamics and the ability to remain calm and effective in situations that sent other trainees to the surface in panic. Assignment to the USS Intrepid in the summer of 1942 represented the culmination of Matthias's naval training and his introduction to the realities of combat operations in the vast expanses of the Pacific Theater. The aircraft carrier's diving unit consisted of 8 highly trained specialists responsible for underwater hull inspections, propeller maintenance, emergency repairs that kept the ship operational during extended deployments, and the occasional recovery operations that war inevitably required. His new crewmates, seasoned veterans with names like Santos, Murphy, Chen, and Kowalski, initially viewed the young diver from Ohio with the skepticism that combat veterans reserve for replacements who arrive with classroom knowledge but no understanding of how actual warfare conditions alter every theoretical calculation. Matthias earned their respect through demonstrated competence rather than conversation or attempts to prove himself through unnecessary risks. The Pacific Theater in 1942 presented strategic and tactical challenges that stretched every branch of the American military beyond the limits of pre-war planning, preparation, and doctrinal assumptions. The Japanese Empire controlled territory spanning from the Aleutian Islands in the North Pacific to the edge of Australia in the South Pacific, creating a maritime domain of unprecedented size that required entirely new approaches to both offensive operations and defensive positioning. American submarine detection technology in 1942 relied primarily on passive sonar systems originally designed for Atlantic operations against German U-boats, which operated according to predictable patterns and employed conventional diesel-electric propulsion systems that produced distinctive acoustic signatures. However, intelligence reports from captured documents during the summer of 1942 indicated that Japanese submarine designers had achieved significant technological advances in underwater stealth capabilities that represented a quantum leap beyond anything American engineers had previously encountered. The I-class submarines represented a completely new generation of long-range vessels, capable of remaining submerged for extended periods while maintaining acoustic signatures so minimal they could barely be distinguished from ambient ocean noise, even by the most sensitive detection equipment available to Allied forces. These revolutionary submarines could travel underwater for distances exceeding 1,000 miles without surfacing, operating on advanced battery systems that could be recharged through innovative engineering techniques. The strategic importance of submarine warfare in the Pacific theater cannot be overstated in terms of its impact on overall American war aims and the sustainability of military operations across the vast expanses of the Pacific Ocean. Japanese submarines had demonstrated their capability to strike American targets at distances previously considered tactically impossible, from the direct shelling of California coastal installations to the torpedoing of merchant vessels within sight of Pearl Harbor's defensive perimeter. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet from his headquarters in Pearl Harbor, faced the unprecedented challenge of protecting supply lines that stretched across 7,000 miles of open ocean, while simultaneously preparing for massive offensive operations against heavily fortified Japanese positions. The logistics of maintaining effective anti-submarine warfare across such distances strained American naval resources to their absolute limits, requiring escort vessels, patrol aircraft, and specialized equipment in quantities that often exceeded available supplies. The loss rate of American merchant vessels in the Pacific had reached levels that threatened the long-term sustainability of military operations throughout the entire theater of war. Submarine attacks accounted for nearly 40% of these losses, yet American forces successfully detected and destroyed less than 15% of enemy submarines that were confirmed to be operating in areas where Allied shipping was being attacked. The USS Intrepid had been operating in Solomon Islands waters for 6 weeks when the pattern of enemy submarine attacks in the region reached a crescendo that threatened not only individual vessels but the entire strategic foundation of the Guadalcanal campaign. 3 major supply convoys had been completely destroyed in the previous month, each attack characterized by torpedoes that appeared from directions where multiple sonar sweeps had detected no hostile contacts whatsoever. The mathematical precision and tactical coordination of these attacks suggested that enemy forces possessed intelligence about American fleet movements that extended far beyond normal reconnaissance capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Harrison faced the seemingly impossible task of protecting his aircraft carrier and its escort vessels while searching for an enemy that seemed to exist only as torpedo tracks and exploding merchant ships. His destroyer escorts conducted continuous anti-submarine patrols, according to established doctrine, their sonar operators scanning empty screens while reporting negative contacts in all directions. Yet deadly torpedoes continued to appear from bearings where sophisticated detection equipment indicated nothing more threatening than schools of fish and normal ocean currents. Matthias had been conducting unauthorized monitoring of the underwater environment around the Intrepid for 3 consecutive weeks, using improvised hydrophone equipment during routine diving operations that provided legitimate cover for his forbidden research activities. The subtle vibrations he detected through his modified equipment followed a complex pattern that suggested the presence of a large submarine maintaining a stationary position approximately 300 yards from the carrier, well beyond the effective detection range of conventional sonar, but close enough to monitor American communications and fleet movements. His attempts to report these findings through official channels had been systematically rejected by the ship's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Morrison, who dismissed Mathias's observations as either equipment malfunction or misinterpretation of natural phenomena that untrained personnel often mistook for hostile activity. Morrison had made it clear during several increasingly heated conversations that enlisted personnel were expected to perform their assigned duties without engaging in unauthorized intelligence-gathering activities. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had been even more direct in his rejection of Mathias's reports, explicitly stating that unauthorized modifications to diving equipment would result in immediate court-martial charges, and that further attempts to circumvent proper reporting procedures would be treated as insubordination, warranting the most severe disciplinary action available under military justice regulations. The breakthrough that would lead to his unauthorized mission came during the pre-dawn hours of November 23rd, when Mathias detected a subtle but unmistakable change in the vibration pattern he had been monitoring for weeks. The enemy submarine was finally moving, beginning to rise from the extreme depths where it had remained hidden while gathering intelligence on American fleet operations. The acoustic signature of electric motors operating at minimal power levels indicated that the vessel was ascending toward optimal attack depth with mechanical precision. He reached for the communication handset to alert the bridge about the approaching threat, then hesitated as he realized the full implications of his discovery and the impossible position it created for his military career. Reporting the contact would require admitting to weeks of unauthorized equipment modifications and diving procedures that violated multiple Navy regulations and direct orders from his commanding officer. The vibrations detected through his improvised equipment intensified dramatically, indicating that the enemy submarine was rapidly approaching the depth and position required for a coordinated torpedo attack that could sink the carrier and kill over 2,000 American personnel within minutes. Mathias faced a choice that compressed the entire conflict between individual conscience and institutional authority into a single moment of irreversible decision. The descent into Pacific darkness carried Mathias beyond the reach of normal diving protocols and safety procedures into a realm where his survival depended entirely on improvised equipment, intuitive navigation, and the mechanical reliability of systems he had modified without authorization or professional oversight. At 150 feet beneath the surface, the enormous water pressure began compressing his diving suit until every movement required conscious effort against hydraulic forces that sought to crush both equipment and human flesh with mathematical precision. His modified hydrophone detected the mechanical vibrations more clearly as he descended, revealing a rhythmic pulse that indicated sophisticated electric motors operating at power levels so minimal they would be undetectable to any conventional sonar system. The acoustic signature suggested propulsion technology far more advanced than anything described in American intelligence reports about Japanese naval capabilities. At 200 feet depth, his diving suit began exhibiting the warning signs of pressure stress that could lead to catastrophic equipment failure and immediate death in the crushing depths of the Pacific Ocean. The rubber gaskets around his helmet fittings compressed under the enormous weight of water overhead, reducing his safety margin to virtually nothing and making any emergency ascent a race against time, decompression requirements, and the limited air supply that his modified equipment could provide under extreme conditions. Then he saw it through the murky water, a shadow darker than the surrounding blackness, enormous and angular, resting motionless on the Pacific Ocean floor like a mechanical predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Japanese submarine was significantly larger than any vessel described in American intelligence reports, its hull stretching nearly 400 feet from bow to stern, representing a scale of underwater engineering that Allied naval architects had never imagined possible. More significantly, the submarine's design incorporated revolutionary features that no American engineer had ever contemplated implementing in underwater vessel construction. The conning tower was reduced to an absolutely minimal profile that would be virtually impossible to detect from surface vessels using conventional observation methods, while the hull itself featured smooth, curved surfaces specifically designed to deflect sonar pulses away from their point of origin. Matthias realized that he was witnessing a complete revolution in submarine warfare technology that rendered obsolete every fundamental assumption about underwater combat capabilities and detection methods in the Pacific theater. This vessel represented technological innovations that could extend Japanese striking power to any point in the Pacific Ocean where American forces gathered, while remaining completely invisible to the detection methods that formed the foundation of Allied anti-submarine defense strategies. The critical moment arrived when he observed the submarine's torpedo tubes beginning their opening sequence in preparation for a coordinated attack that would unleash multiple warheads against the unsuspecting carrier above. The targeting solution had already been calculated with mechanical precision, the tubes trained toward the exact surface position where the Intrepid maintained its routine patrol station, completely unaware that death was ascending toward them from the invisible depths. Matthias reached for the improvised underwater explosive devices he had constructed from standard demolition materials available aboard the Intrepid, charges that violated numerous regulations governing the handling and deployment of explosive materials aboard naval vessels. The devices were originally designed for emergency underwater repairs to hull damage or propeller systems, but they could be adapted for offensive operations against enemy targets through modifications that would constitute unauthorized weapons development. Using these improvised explosive devices against a foreign naval vessel would represent an unauthorized attack on enemy forces, an action that could easily be interpreted as mutiny, insubordination, or even treason under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, depending on the legal interpretation applied by court-martial proceedings. Yet the alternative was to remain a passive observer while the Intrepid became another casualty of an invisible enemy that conventional forces could not detect, engage, or defeat. The first explosion sent massive shockwaves through the water column that compressed his diving suit and threatened to rupture the air lines connecting him to survival, while simultaneously announcing to every person within miles that underwater combat was now taking place in an area where no official records indicated any hostile activity. Emergency lighting systems throughout the enemy submarine activated automatically to provide illumination for damage control procedures as flooding began in multiple compartments. The enemy vessel immediately began an uncontrolled emergency ascent, rising from the ocean floor with a speed that indicated severe damage to ballast systems and depth control mechanisms that were essential for underwater operations. Matthias had successfully forced the submarine to surface through methods that no naval manual had ever contemplated. But he had also announced his presence to a crew that would be extremely motivated to eliminate the threat he represented. He began his own desperate ascent, racing against decompression requirements, diminishing air supply, and the possibility that enemy personnel might attempt to eliminate him before he could reach the safety of American forces on the surface. The attacking submarine was now clearly visible to conventional sonar systems throughout the fleet, appearing on detection screens as a large hostile contact rising rapidly from depths that previous searches had determined were empty. Above him, the Pacific surface erupted into the chaos of combat as the Intrepid's crew responded to the sudden appearance of an enemy submarine in their immediate defensive perimeter, while alarm bells sounded throughout the carrier as weapons systems trained on the rising target and destroyer escorts converged to ensure that the damaged submarine could not escape destruction. The damaged submarine breached the surface approximately 300 yards from the Intrepid's starboard bow, its hull clearly buckled and flooding from the effects of Matthias's improvised explosive attack, while emergency signals flashed from the vessel's conning tower as the crew attempted to surrender before American gunfire could complete the destruction. American naval gunfire converged on the target from multiple directions with devastating effectiveness, ensuring that the advanced submarine technology would not survive to threaten other American ships. Matthias reached the surface as the enemy submarine disappeared beneath a concentrated barrage of naval gunfire and secondary explosions that marked the end of the most advanced underwater threat American forces had encountered in the Pacific theater. His unauthorized dive had lasted 47 minutes, far beyond the safety limits for diving equipment that was never designed for such extreme operational conditions. The immediate response from the Intrepid's crew focused on medical rescue rather than disciplinary interrogation, as Navy medical personnel worked frantically to ensure that Matthias survived his extended exposure to crushing depths, toxic gas concentrations, and the physiological stress of underwater combat operations. The heroic nature of his actions was obvious to everyone who witnessed the sequence of events, yet the completely unauthorized nature of his mission created complex legal problems. The investigation that followed consumed nearly 4 weeks of detailed interviews, technical analysis, and legal review by Navy lawyers who struggled to balance the obvious benefits of his actions against the serious violations of military law that had made those benefits possible. Rather than court-martial proceedings, Matthias received both an official commendation for extraordinary courage under enemy fire and a formal reprimand for unauthorized modifications to military equipment. The technical innovations that Matthias had developed through months of unauthorized experimentation became the foundation for improved anti-submarine warfare capabilities that extended throughout the Pacific theater. His modified hydrophone design was refined by Navy engineers and manufactured for widespread distribution to diving units across the entire fleet. Within 8 months of his unauthorized dive, American forces had achieved significant improvements in submarine detection that reduced Allied shipping losses by nearly 45%. The destroyed submarine represented an intelligence treasure trove that fundamentally reshaped American understanding of Japanese underwater warfare capabilities. Debris recovery operations revealed advanced electric motor technology, sophisticated passive sonar equipment, and hull construction materials that explained the vessel's ability to remain completely undetected for extended periods while conducting surveillance and attack operations. Return to civilian life in 1945 brought Matthias back to Youngstown, Ohio, where he found employment in the same steel mills that had shaped his childhood and provided the technical foundation for his wartime innovations. He married Catherine Morrison, a local teacher, and together they built a life that honored both his extraordinary wartime service and his desire for normal peacetime stability. The medals and commendations he had earned during his Pacific service remained in a bedroom drawer, rarely displayed or discussed. Letters began arriving during the 1950s from men who had served aboard ships throughout the Pacific Fleet, writing to thank Matthias for innovations that had saved their lives during subsequent submarine encounters. Chief Petty Officer Santos wrote, "I never understood why that enemy submarine surfaced when it did, or how our forces were suddenly able to detect threats that had been invisible for months. Now I know it was your courage that brought all of us home safely." The legacy of Matthias Kovalenko's unauthorized dive continues to resonate through contemporary naval operations in ways that extend far beyond the immediate tactical victory he achieved. His willingness to disobey direct orders in pursuit of a greater moral good established precedents that continue to influence military thinking about the balance between institutional discipline and individual initiative when facing unprecedented challenges. Would you have made the same choice that Matthias Kovalenko faced in the Pacific darkness on November 23, 1942? Would you have followed regulations and watched 2,000 American sailors die? Or would you have risked everything to save those lives through completely unauthorized action? His legacy challenges each of us to consider whether we possess the moral courage necessary to do what is right. When doing what is right conflicts directly with doing what is officially required. Comment below and share this story, so others remember what authentic courage means when everything is at stake and official channels offer no hope for success. The legacy of one Navy diver's unauthorized heroism continues to inspire leaders who understand that following orders sometimes requires the moral courage to disobey them when human lives hang in the balance.